Well, yeah, don't anthropomorphize the LLMs. And what do I mean by
That's
that?
perfect.
uh, so what's really cool about that is I love to talk about it because sometimes I'll hear somebody say that when I'm talking to ChatGPT, this large language model, it seems like it's alive, that it has consciousness, that it knows what I'm thinking. And I totally understand that, but that's not what's happening. I think that the part where that happens is that there's human consciousness that's drenching the human patterns that it's using to uh, sort of make these predictions. So it's the content that has the consciousness, not the model. So that's what I wanted to say. That's a very common thing. And I think also that's where the fear comes from, right? This thing is alive, it's super smart, but it's actually really working on making predictions. And that's what I love to talk about that because it's super interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because a lot of times some of the solutions that get marketed or publicized, there's a hype cycle to those things, and so we can see that now today. Obviously, some of the predictions or capabilities of some of those models are being, I believe, somewhat oversold for the use cases that they're trying to be used for. But I think probably one of the things that I would want folks to really at least spend a little bit of time on is understanding how some of these things actually work. And that can be very intimidating because, you see these machine learning models and these data scientists and so forth, and they have all these degrees. And I'm guilty of the same thing. I don't have a deep math background. And at one point in time, I thought to myself, there's no way I can understand any of this stuff. I'm never going to figure this out. But my journey was just trying to find alternative ways of understanding how some of these machine learning models work, meaning that rather than the mathematical definition, if I could visualize the intuitive definition of how one of those things work, then that helps me better understand how it actually works under covers, and probably more so, importantly, I think, is learning what the limitations are. So if you know how they work, you can say, oh, I can see how that would totally not work in this use case. Although it may spit out some text that may convince you that it thinks it knows what it's doing. But the reality is it's just statistically chaining words together that it's already seen before in its training data. So that's one thing I would probably want folks to know is do invest a little bit of time, and whether it's with our content or some other way of getting that, but just get some base level knowledge about what the limitations are of those models. What are the real, I guess, rough. So I guess if we step back a little bit, chatbots have been a thing for a while, and I have yet to this day been able to experience a chatbot that is not disappointing, not terribly disappointing. And even with all these large language models being incorporated into these chatbots with all this context and stuff like that, even still, it's work. And to make matters worse, there are certain examples of companies putting these large language models inside chatbots and then putting them out there on their website. And guess what? The chatbot provided a response, but it was a totally different response than the company would endorse. So, it could be anywhere from being really awkward to, in the case of one year, I don't know the names, but they basically were forced by a court to enforce what this chatbot told a customer, even though that was contrary to what their policy was of being able to refund certain travel. So we're getting cases where I think some of the pressures, maybe at the executive level, are getting to the point where there's this fear of missing out. So therefore, so we can not miss out, let's push these things into practice. And for the most part, they're mostly just big black boxes. Absolutely. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. Doesn't it seem like the transformer architecture came out of nowhere and surprised everyone, right? And that, right?
But it's hard to, it's not any, it's our revolutionary idea, you know?
Absolutely, I agree. And yeah, so it took the world by storm, surprised even the people that wrote the white paper about the transformer architecture, and then just took the world by storm. So the power of it is intimidating, and I totally understand why the pressures exist for implementing that into every organization as fast as possible. Don't want to miss out on the income, on that generating the revenue. I totally get that. However, they hallucinate. And then that's the biggest problem. We have this, I think what the most fascinating thing is us handing the baton potentially from explicit programming, right? It's not going to just make something up. Mm-hmm. It's going to add the numbers and give you the correct answer, to moving into this software architecture built on neural networks. That's how this all started. Let's create and write software based on how the brain works using with neural networks. And then it's split off, but that's how it started. And what's fascinating about that is that we can write these beautiful programs and they'll just like hallucinate. And so here's a free airline ticket. You're great. And then they had to, hypothetically, I'm not sure about the details of the case, but if your LLM says that in a business context, well, you have to uphold that, and that's a legally binding contract. And these are problems in the sense that we didn't expect that, right? So you have all of this engineering talent on Earth getting ready to deal with something that's unpredictable, right? And I think that's a frightening and exciting at the same time.
Yes, yeah, and we also have this. I mean, it's this thing with self-driving cars or any sort of decision-making models where you have this concept of agency. Does this entity have agency? And if it makes wrong decisions, who then is responsible? If it plagiarizes, who then is responsible? So I think obviously the onus is on the user who is ultimately using that and maybe publishing that concept to be representative of something they created. But also, if you're following some of the things that are happening in EU right now, I think it's probably not too long before we get to the equivalent of a nutrition label for whatever services or products or whatever that we may have to apply to our products and services that specifically say, hey, this percentage of this product was generated by AI, and not just AI, but this specific model. And then I think that's going to, change things, not only how organizations publish things, but also how consumers perceive those things, especially if their interactions with ChatGPT or whatever the LLMs are, whatever the technology is maybe not necessarily a positive thing. So, I think obviously it's going to change the workforce. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. So an interesting thing is, the fear, and this is, I've talked about this quite a bit, and which is people are afraid of losing their jobs, right? That's a big deal. And I went to the last AI conference 2023, and I wrote this big article, and the spoiler alert was, are we going to lose our jobs? Nope. And the reason is, let's go back to the steam engine. There's this paradox, and I'm sorry, I can't remember it off the top of my head, where technology like the one that we have exists, and we're afraid that the jobs are going to go away because it's so much more powerful. But what happens is that jobs increase. The steam engine, when that steam engine came onto the scene, everyone thought, well, coal prices are going to plummet, but actually they increased. So that's what I want to say, is that this may be a counterintuitive time, whereas you may think that your job is going to be taken from you. But I believe, from what I've researched and everyone that I've talked to, the brightest minds in the field, that there's actually going to be a labor shortage, even in the future. So I'm hopeful that we're not going to lose our jobs. We're going to use this and augment our jobs. I'm hopeful for that from what I've seen before. Of course, it's not 100%. It's not even a high probability of that. It's 50-50 potentially, right? It could go either way, but I'm hopeful that we won't lose our jobs, so that we can use this technology for all of the awesomeness that the potential that it holds. I'm really excited for that too.
Let me put back you on you. Of course, so I knew that was going the Machiavellian approach. Okay, all right. So one of the common examples that I've heard a lot is, oh yeah, when cars were invented, the buggy whip manufacturers went out of business, right? Well, that proliferation of that adoption of that technology took decades. Yeah, absolutely. And we're in a situation where the proliferation of technology, that S curve of innovation, is really compressed, especially with some of the enablers like cloud computing and ubiquitous internet access. So I think that although that transformation can happen and it could happen, my fear is that it has compressed itself into a time frame that is not capable of happening, because it's not going to happen within a generation. It's going to happen within months in some cases.
Yeah.
So I know some folks who were copywriters, and they were told one day, "Hey, we got ChatGPT. We're not making you anymore." So there are cases where, like, graphic artists, voiceover artists would do that. That are this technology right now, and I've tried it out myself, and I can mimic my own voice to do voiceovers for whatever I need if I wanted to do that. But then again, so what sort of defense mechanisms, or what would be the response for somebody who may find themselves in that situation, or at least they aspire to be that, and they're like, hey, does this future hold me, or should I pivot and learn code?
Yeah, or even pivot to something that's not technology based. The complexity of that time period is something that I don't know. It's question mark. That's why I was thinking in the future, like later, past that point. The early adoption and how all this is going to play out in the next 5 years is really fuzzy to me. Yeah, I have no idea, to be quite honest. But I am excited because we've been building our technology, getting smarter and creating more systems. And this is the first time that we have this is a long time coming. And I feel that there are some problems that we cannot solve without using the technologies that we're creating. Humanity has a hard time scaling. And I'm hopeful that we can use these technologies to scale humanity. And I'm hopeful for that. I don't know how it's going to pan out, though, but it's a good point.
Well, I guess maybe thinking about non-technology spaces, you were explaining to me earlier about a very interesting mashup or intersection that you've experienced, or you've seen in the more or less artistic world of composition, music, and AI. Tell me a little bit about kind of that overlay and that intermix.
Absolutely. So and we can apply this to graphic arts, literature, writers, any creative human expression, really. I believe that is the value of human compute is going to increase alongside artificial intelligence, right? Machine compute, because they're two different kinds of intelligence. And I believe that they can coexist, and there's going to be value to art. I think is going to be a renaissance, because we're going to be able to focus on human compute activities and to do art and to get into the human emotional side of things. You can't replace music. It would make it pointless, because it's about enjoyment. For example, if someone plays music and they're performing and they're expressing their art, whatever it may be, it could be theater, it could be any kind of human creative experience. When they're presenting that, they're feeling an emotion and they're translating that emotion to others, right? So it's like a human activity. That's not going to happen with artificial intelligence. It's a different kind of intelligence. And I believe that it can be used in a very specific way to solve human problems while giving us the relief to be human beings again. So I'm definitely, as you can see, very optimistic about this technology, very excited about it. But I do appreciate you pushing back, because there are some very serious dangers and some real serious problems that we need to overcome. For example, we need to have open source models. We need to keep that distributed. That's going to be a challenge. We don't want to have centralized powers with AI, no matter how good of an intention or how good that they are, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I think we may have been talking about a couple of days ago or yesterday was with these closed source models, you're only a step away from product placement and selling, specific advertising. Hey, ChatGPT, show me how to brew beer, sponsored by,
Right.
beer company or whatever.
Absolutely.
Right. So, so it sounds like to me you kind of have this differentiation. Is that there is a certain aspect of the human experience that is producing art for the self and for the community, the overall. But there is also this concept of monetizing, stinging everything.
Absolutely.
How does AI fit in that kind of the race to monetize everything in the attention economy?
One theory out there that I like very much is that we're going to enter the age of prosperity, that the cost for things are going to be so ridiculously low that we're going to enjoy not only a renaissance of art, but also manufacturing. If it gets to the point where everything is really inexpensive and it's because we have these technologies, I think that that's going to free us up to do things that we've never done before. I think the way that we make money and the way that we're so focused on making money breeds this kind of structure for monetizing everything. Maybe we can get out of that. Maybe we don't have to monetize everything. Maybe we can get a little room to breathe and be humans, and have this amazing technology side by side. That's the theory that I'm most excited about. I don't know, of course, but that's the first one that popped into my mind. I really like where you're going with this, though. And I think this is a great conversation, right? We're sort of checking both sides a little bit. And that's exactly what we need, right? We don't want everyone to be super optimistic about it or pessimistic, right? We don't want to regulate this to the point where, it just really ruins it or it creates some unintended consequences and so on.
Yeah, that's something from a historical standpoint. I think when we don't understand something or we're scared of something, then we tend to, shut it down, regulate it, the moratorium on this sort of work, right? And then, on the flip side of that, you have the folks that say, yes, just make it free, let it breathe, let whoever wants to use it, kind of more of the open source type might. One of the things that I know that policymakers are concerned about is using AI in various ways. So what would you say, based on your kind of future vision, maybe some may call it Utopia, enabled technology vision, how do we deal with the potential threats here? The fact that somebody out there somewhere is going to have a philosophical problem, maybe they're unstable or something like that. Renee have decided, similar to, maybe it's not as drastic, at least in the US here, is that the conversation on firearm control. They can do very, very good things, some very beneficial things for us. They can also reach a lot of tragedy. So what sort of things do you think we can do with regard to the AI matters?
Yeah, I'm going to answer this in an interesting way. I'm just going to jump back a little bit and say that with these large language models, we can provide access to mental health in a way that's never existed. So we can mitigate these things. Also, when you have a community that also uses these augmented intelligence, right? They're augmenting their intelligence, but it's everybody in the community, not just some people in the community. Then we can police each other. We can create, and actually that's a very popular technique with LLMs. You have one LLM police the other, not to use that word, not to even use regulate, but it's an ecosystem that self-regulates, and I think having many open source models was one way to do that, just like this self-organizing human behavior happens in groups, right? Generally speaking, we can self-organize, and this is a natural process that we have. And that's kind of the first thing that pops into my mind. What do you think?
So I'd probably say from my perspective, I think, it's basically the same thing, robotics. When it comes to robotics, there's no way I as an individual can go out and buy a Boston Dynamics robotic, quality robot yet, right? Yet, but I have that at Roomba, and it was a terrible disaster. So
Imagine if the Roomba was strong, like one of those robots.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that fear is kind of based on some of these that are, I guess, science fiction kind of cast forward, some of these movies and stuff like that.
Sure.
I truly believe that some of the models that we have in place are just not capable of some of that stuff just yet, or at least it's going to do so in a way that's easily preventable or mitigatable. I really believe strongly in that this concept of being able to fingerprint certain outputs of models so it could do some traceability and so forth. But I think, like you said, there is the possibility of, instead of always looking at the bad things that this can do, what can this do for somebody in a mental health crisis, or it's like somebody just wanting to speak to a friend? I mean, there's a lot of research being done right now about how beneficial are kind of chatbots, or even the robots to the mental health of folks that are indigent or the elderly.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, and I'm actually trying to use some of these AI pins with my mom and take care of her, and to see if I can actually use this. And I'm starting to try to innovate in that way. I was like, well, maybe we can use these things.
Yeah.
And I wanted to circle back with a question that you asked earlier. I think this is something that it might be interesting. Is like, what is a mistake that you've made, and that you would now maybe talk to your previous self, like how not to make this mistake? And in this context, one thing that just popped into my mind, which I think is even more relevant now than it's ever been, which is, if you're going to learn machine learning and let's say you're excited about it, you're probably going to just dive into machine learning. And that's the mistake that I made, right? In 2006, I was like, that's what I'm going to just dive into. That's going to be able to solve this problem that I'm working on. And I did. The problem there is that if you spend a long time with these technologies, what you'll find is I have all of this data. And so most of your time and your skills are going to be cleaning that data, processing that data, and doing all this stuff before you can do any of the cool stuff you just learned, like I experienced. So I would say, really think about data analytics as your first, being able to massage data, work with data. If you're into programming in Python, pandas is a great tool to get familiar with, because then you can change the shape and clean and obfuscate, change data that you don't want to send to the LLM. All of these things are vital skill, and it's a really great way to get introduced to Python. And when you use Python and pandas for data analysis, then you can move into some of the data science, and then you can get into machine learning. I really feel that is something that I learned, and I think that is more relevant today because of all the hype, right?
Yep.
There's all this GPT, LLMs, and all of these people that don't have that background and jumping into this field, data analytics.
I definitely agree. I think probably my journey is slightly different. I think it's very tempting because a lot of these APIs that are published right now, all you got to do is a REST call, feed into the information, and it spits out information. I would encourage folks to get a little bit deeper, try to learn how that thing works intuitively. And I don't necessarily mean get down into the nitty-gritty, details and stuff like that, but at least be able to know how to, for instance, a large language model uses just basically statistical joining together those words to output stuff. And so if I knew that, or if a lot of people know that, they're like, okay, this is not some, oracle on high that's some super genius entity that's giving me advice on how to cook butter chicken or something like that, right? So it's actually just kind of regurgitating a pattern that it already saw many, many, many times.
Absolutely.
Right? So, I mean, I can attest that I asked ChatGPT, hey, give me a recipe for Indian butter chicken. And it was a wonderful recipe. But the reality is, I don't know if it swiped that from some other recipe already on the internet created by a human, right?
Absolutely,
so,
yeah.
So I didn't say, oh, this is some culinary god that I need to pay attention to or anything. The other aspect is, a lot of times when people are getting into machine learning or AI, then kind of the like lingua franca is mathematics. A lot of people kind of speak these things, and you'll see a lot of the content out there wanting to or offering to train the folks almost is based from a mathematics perspective, and that's perfectly valid. But what I want to say is that there are other ways of learning how things work still where you don't necessarily have to understand all of math. Absolutely. There are plenty of people on this earth who understand how an internal combustion engine works, but they never went to, day one of math 101 or physics 101 or anything like that talks about, compression ratios and all this other stuff and the air, oxygen, they know this stuff inherently and intuitively because somebody else has taught them that or they learned it through their own experience. So I guess my thing that I wish I had learned earlier in my career is that there are many other paths to take to learn stuff other than what might be considered kind of the default or the routine patch. So
especially now more than ever, right? Yeah. Like the cat sat on the hat, or right, not the car. Right. And that's really like the beginning stages of learning how it's doing that. Once you see that structure, like you're mentioning, it really illuminates, oh, that's what it's doing. Mm-hmm. What's mind-boggling to me still to today, it's how it does that so fast, and it's just chaining these things. It doesn't make sense to me. I can't think like that.
It's a fantastically large scale, like,
in human scales. It's hard to think about.
And that is another thing. And if you look at the history of kind of machine learning innovations, they come in these kind of waves. Typically speaking, you'll see the waves either dry up when something came out of favor or people got distracted with something else, or we reached the limitations of our computing power during that time. So I think we're probably going to continue to grow until we reach the limitations of whatever computing power we have. I mean, each bounce up against this, economic ceiling with where it doesn't make sense to make a bigger computer. And then I think we're going to kind of coast for a while. And then something else is going to come along. Maybe it's quantum or something like that. That'll give us another juice boost. And you can really get another boost of activity there.
I agree. I think that it's exciting to learn about machine learning and to understand, at least at a basic level, how the brain works and neurons work. And then slowly start to realize that that it's modeled after our brain. Yeah. And like you're saying, we have an immense potential and we can unlock that potential, right? And I think that's counterintuitive. It's like, oh, here's AI. Well, it's using our neural network connections and it's nowhere near as advanced as our neural network connections. So at this very basic, the only difference is that it has parallel computing and a lot of computing power. However, the way that we learn is it's magical. And it takes that from us. And I think that we can use the same, like you're illuminating, that is a model for growth. The more you learn about machine learning, the more I felt empowered. And that's the message that I have. You have what it takes to learn machine learning. Learn machine learning and you'll understand why. And that's kind of what I really like about your message, Scott. And that gets me super excited because people may not believe that they can learn it, right? Maybe they don't have the math background, but you can build an agent to help you learn that, right? If you're working with the LLMs, well, you would give the agent a REPL so that it can actually do math correctly, because otherwise it may hallucinate.